Positivity, guys, and welcome back to the Televised Podcast. My name is Anna, and today we're going to be talking about Black Widow. I saw this movie opening weekend. I got to go to the theater out to go see it, and it was so good. I had such a good time. I really thoroughly enjoyed this movie, and I think it's so worth a watch for anybody who hasn't seen it. I would absolutely go see it. Go to the theater. That's the real thing. If there's a theater near you that is playing this movie and is open and you're vaccinated and you feel comfortable, go see this movie because it is so wonderful and it is such an experience on the big screen to see all the action sequences, all the fight scenes up on the big screen. It's just so good and it's so worthwhile to go. And you don't have to pay $30 on Disney Plus. You could just go and get like take you and a friend and you can pay like $20. It'll be great. It'll be a good time. I had a really good time seeing it, and I just thought it was really enjoyable, and I wanted to talk about it. And if you listened for a while or even just looked at the kind of like content that I talk about, I'm not a Marvel fan. I cover DC almost exclusively. I don't really talk about Marvel. I've not talked about Marvel before in the past, anything specifically Marvel related, but I felt that I wanted to do an episode about this movie because I just think that it hit on all the right points for me of a movie that I think is so worthwhile and such an incredible addition to not only the like female superhero movie lineup, but also just like the comic book movie genre in general, and also just the MCU in general, and how it just feels so different from the installments that we've had in the past. And I thought it just did really cool things. And I think it's important to talk about, especially because I think there's a lot of division about this film. That seems like anything I talk about, there's a lot of division about. But it's because everybody's so opinionated, and I've got my own opinions too, and I thought it worked really well. Some people will not agree with me, which is fine, obviously. But I wanted to talk about it because I just think that it was such a good movie, and something that I didn't go in with like insanely high expectations or anything for this movie. I kind of went in just being like, I'm excited to see whatever they do. And I was really, really pleasantly surprised with pretty much every aspect of this film. I thought it was really great. And I think especially for Marvel's first female directed, like solely female directed superhero movie to hit the big screens, I think it was really good, and it set the tone in a really cool way for for me, like MCU content that I would like to see going forward, especially in relation to characters that don't have powers, which I thought was kind of a highlight of this movie. So yeah, we're just going to talk about the movie and the things that I really liked about it, the kind of like my own experience with Marvel. I want to talk a little bit about that before we fully dive into everything, but I do want to say that this will have spoilers in it. I mean, nothing too crazy, but I'm definitely going to be referring to scenes and characters and reveals and villains and everything like that, so I definitely would recommend that you see this movie before you listen to this, unless you just don't care about spoilers and want to listen, then go ahead, but this is just your warning that this will have quite a lot of spoilers in it, because I want to talk about, the really cool parts about this movie, which I thought were kind of those really heavy spoiler areas. So just your fair warning. And actually, I went into this movie, like I said, with kind of not low expectations, but just I didn't know what to expect, and I just was wanting to like it, and I did. But I also went in not really knowing anything about this movie. I watched the first trailer, and then I probably watched the second trailer, but then after that I didn't watch any more trailers. Anytime it came on my TV, I just tried to not pay attention. I didn't look up any kind of interviews, or I didn't read any articles. I muted like every single word relating to Black Widow on my Twitter timeline because I just didn't want to go in with any kind of like ideas floating around in my head or like conceived, like biases or like judgments or anything like that. I really didn't want to kind of like sour this experience with other people's opinions at that time. I thought that worked out so well because I just went in and I was surprised by so many things that they threw at me. And I thought that was really cool. So if you have not seen it, don't listen to this. Go watch it and then come back and listen and I mean, see if you agree with me, but also just, enjoy the movie without really knowing what's going to happen, because that's how I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was really great to experience it like that. So really quick, before we actually talk about Black Widow, I do want to talk about my own personal background with Marvel, just so there's some context to my thoughts and to my opinions, because I don't care about the MCU. I've been underwhelmed by a lot of their content, by a lot of their films, by a lot of their TV shows. I don't think that it is the franchise for me, which is not to say that it's really like horrible or bad or anything, but I do think, especially in those like early films, it was it was all homogenous in a way. All of their movies felt the same, felt very formulaic, and just felt like the same person made all of them. And I just didn't vibe with that, and I didn't really care for the characters all that much, because, I mean, for me, like I said, DC is like my thing. I love DC, and I think that the characters are just so good. And I mean, people can like say what they want about the DCEU, but I think that out of all of these characters that they've introduced so far, every single film that has been about those characters has been extremely interesting and extremely like different from one another. Like Aquaman is a Shakespearean sort of dramatic, campy film about, Arthur and his journey to becoming Aquaman, and I think that worked really well. And then Wonder Woman is totally different. It's this like big drama piece while simultaneously being a superhero movie. And I mean, love it or hate it, like Man of Steel is very stylized, and I've said my opinions about Zack Snyder before, but whatever. And Birds of Prey is so different, and Kathy Yan and what she brought to the franchise is so special. And for me, the MCU just doesn't have that, or they've only just recently started having that. For some context, the only MCU movies that I've seen to completion, so I've seen quite a number, like in bits and pieces. Like I've seen the first Guardians of the Galaxy, but never the whole thing. Or like Captain America: The First Avenger, I've never made it to the end because I get so bored. The first Avengers, same thing. I just can't continue to watch it. The first Thor movie, I tried to watch that one too. And so on and so forth. I've seen them in bits and pieces, but the only ones that I've ever actually seen completely all the way through are Captain America: The Winter Soldier, Black Panther, Captain Marvel, Thor Ragnarok, Infinity War, Endgame, and Black Widow, obviously. And then show-wise, I've actually only seen Runaways. I've not watched any other MCU show. And technically, Runaways, they're like, you're not part of the MCU, but it's the best of their TV entries, genuinely. From what I've seen. I haven't seen WandaVision, but I'm sure it's great, but so those movies that I've seen, the ones that I've actually really enjoyed have been Black Panther, Captain Marvel, Thor Ragnarok, and Black Widow. And I think the thing that makes all of those movies stand out from the rest of the MCU lineup is their creative differences, or the creative freedom that was allowed to the directors or to the writers of those films. And I think that that's what makes them work so well, because like when you're watching Thor Ragnarok, which really was the film that pushed Marvel with its success to allowing for more creative freedom, to allow their movies to just be different. I guess Guardians did that, but Thor was the first like main core Avengers movie that they let be different and be unique and be silly and funny and campy, but also be emotional and just a wonderful story that was being told in a really colorful comic book way. I think Taika Waititi was able to just like break through that Marvel like concrete, that the other films feel like they're made in. It just, and kind of changed the way that the MCU looks going forward, which I think is really responsible for the reason that we're even getting things like Black Panther, Black Widow, Captain Marvel, Doctor Strange, these new like takes on these characters, the more creative freedom is because of the success of films like Thor Ragnarok. And it just feels so wonderful and different. And the thing too about, you might think, well, Thor Ragnarok and Black Widow couldn't be more dissimilar, and that is true, but also that's the thing, is like Black Widow feels uniquely Black Widow. It feels like a Black Widow movie made by this woman who truly cared to tell the Black Widow story. And the same thing with Captain Marvel. She had her own personal like take on this movie, or like her character was taken in that direction that felt uniquely Captain Marvel. Same thing with Black Panther. Like his world was so uniquely Black Panther, and especially Black Panther, like so uniquely Ryan Coogler and what he was able to bring to the screen. And I love that. And I think it's just, and that's kind of leads me into one thing that I've seen a lot about this film, is that it's, quote, too little too late. Which, in some ways I do agree with. That obviously they should have treated Natasha better for the entirety of her stay in the MCU. 10 years later, she gets a movie and it's only after she was killed off. That's ridiculous. But I also think that it came at the perfect time where Marvel was finally allowing their creators to have some creative freedom and to have some creative say. And, it had to come after the success of Wonder Woman. Because before Wonder Woman, before like 2016, 2017, Marvel didn't really believe in creative freedom for directors, or they didn't believe in women to direct their movies. And so for them to see the global success of Wonder Woman and to see the success and praise of Patty Jenkins, I think that had to happen for Marvel to like open their eyes and see like, okay, well, now we can do Black Widow. And then they didn't even do her first. They did Captain Marvel first, and that was crazy. But like I said, I think that they had to... It had to be made now. It just, because I'm thinking about it and I'm like, okay, if this movie had come out before 2016, 2017, which around 2016, 2017 was like the Me Too movement, as well as, like I said, the release of Wonder Woman, and then also the release of Thor Ragnarok. So there was so many factors that kind of came in like 2017 to, I think, change up the direction of cinema, period, but also the direction of the MCU, just to like do a little bit of a turn, because, obviously now it's in a different place than it was 10 years ago when it started. And I think about going back to that starting point and thinking about how a Black Widow movie would have looked pre-2017, pre-Me Too, pre-Wonder Woman. And it doesn't look good. It doesn't look good. It doesn't look good. It would have been directed by Joss Whedon. It would have been written by Joss Whedon. I know that for sure. Or just somebody like him, And especially because back then they loved Joss Whedon over at Marvel. Yeah, so it totally, they loved him over there, obviously. And it totally would have been directed by him, and it would have been terrible. His Wonder Woman script leaked a while ago, and I just can't help but think that had they decided to make a Black Widow movie, had they been like, yeah, sure, we'll do a female superhero movie, we'll do a female superhero solo movie, that'll be great. I totally believe in that. If they had felt that way pre-2017, Joss Whedon would have got it, he would have written it, he would have directed it, and this is what it would have sounded like. This is a quote from his Wonder Woman script. It says, "To say she is beautiful is almost to miss the point. She is elemental, as natural and wild as the luminous flora surrounding. Her dark hair waterfalls to her shoulders in soft arcs and curls. Her body is curvaceous, but taut as a drawn bow. She wears burnished metal bracelets on both wrists, wide and intricately detailed. Her shift is of another era. We'd call it ancient Greek. She is barefoot." Like, that's the character introduction, and he admits that he was picturing Angelina Jolie, and apparently multiple characters refer to Diana as a bitch and a whore throughout the entire thing, and apparently Steve also delivers an incredibly fun and empowering line, "You're not a hero, Diana, you're a tourist." How wonderful. Yeah, so it would have not been good. It would have been terrible if Mr. Whedon had been allowed to direct this Black Widow movie. So I mean, for the reasons of being like, it's been 10 years and she's already dead, I get it. It is too late. It's too little too late. But for so many other reasons, it's also the perfect time, and I just think it worked so well, especially when we talk about the themes for the film, the villains, the fight scenes, Taskmaster, Dreykov, human trafficking, violence against women, like autonomy, consent. I loved that they dealt with that. And I don't see a reality where we could have had that kind of movie be this mainstream before Me Too and before 2017. It just would not have been, they wouldn't have been able to tell this important of a story, you know? And I love the opening credits. It felt so different from any comic book movie that I'd ever seen. I just think that it really established the vibe that they were going for the rest of the film. And I love that in it they edited like Dreykov to be with the Bill Clinton, and like the widows were there, like really just like going hard and establishing that even in, I mean, yeah, it's Marvel, and they're like, this is happening, you know, in the comic book world, and what you see is not meant to be a depiction of real life, you know, to cover their asses, but it's saying, the messaging is that human trafficking and exploitation of young women and girls, and just women in general, not necessarily just young women, but women and young girls, happens at the largest scales of politics and with the most powerful men in our country and in our world. And I think that was just such a cool way to kick off this movie, because it put me on edge instantly. You know, they had that haunting rendition of Smells Like Teen Spirit, and then, you know, we obviously watched Natasha and Elena be, you know, trafficked and be, you know, put with all these other little girls, and to then see all of those pictures, I think it just immediately like set me on edge and set the tone, and it made me feel anxious for what was going to happen with the rest of this movie, and I just think it worked really well. And I loved that Taskmaster was revealed to be the young girl that Natasha thought she had killed, and I love how they established that she was just as much a victim as Elena and Nat and the other widows. The line that she said, "Is he gone?" like, that was just haunting, and it gave me chills. Like, it just hit me so hard, and it was like, you know, I feel like almost any other superhero movie would have just like taken that villain and been like, you know, F you were working with the person who tortured me, I'm gonna beat you just for fun or whatever, you know? Like, but Natasha, with how she feels and how empathetic she is, I just really, really loved the moment of her being like, we're gonna make sure that you're okay, like, we're gonna get you out of here. It's not your fault. You know, none of this is your fault. We're gonna help you. And I loved that. I loved it. And the thing is too, that I've seen a lot of takes, a lot of hot takes about especially Melina and Alexei, and I think that, because people have been saying like Melina was redeemed too easily, or like Alexei was redeemed too easily, but the thing is that they were both victims too, no matter like what way you slice it. when you think about it, Melina, she was cycled through the Red Room, she said 3 times before Nat was even born. Who knows how many more times they inundated her with psychological torment to make sure that she stuck with her captors, you know? And it's like, she was just as much of a victim as Yelena and as Natasha and as the other widows. Just because she was the first generation does not mean that she was like fully consenting and complicit in all of this. She did what she had to do to survive. Like, she continued working for him because she knows that there's no way out. Especially now, because she was the one helping to control them and make sure there was no way out. And then I think for Alexei, I mean, you could argue that, sure, he was the most complicit, but, like, I think, I mean, what probably happened to him was that he, like, against his, you know, without his consent, they turned him into a super soldier and made him do their dirty work and then tossed him aside and threw him in prison. Like, that was what happened. And he was victimized by Dreykov just as, I mean, maybe not as much, but still enough to the point where he didn't really have, you know, much of a choice in the matter. I don't know. But, I mean, I think that what really mattered was when the time came, he did help the girls, and he did help them, and he did care for them. And I just think that was really important, and I don't know, I thought that the redemption worked. Like, I don't think he's ever meant to be, like, an extremely likable, good guy, total hero character. He's meant to be somebody who's kind of an antagonist, who's, you know, like an anti-hero, almost, you know? That's how I perceived him, and that's how I kind of accepted him as he was in the end of the movie, especially. Just because, I mean, you know, he was never gonna be, you know, the next big hero. He just was this guy who had questionable morals, but ultimately did get roped into something that was much bigger than he was, and something that he really didn't have much control over. Like, they were just gonna let him rot in prison for the rest of his life, you know? And so, I don't know, maybe I'm just too easy on them, but I really liked them as characters, specifically, so I think it worked well enough for me to understand that they are victims, especially Melina, you know, in comparison to Alexei, but still. And for Dreykov, I loved that he wasn't this crazy CGI magical villain, that he was just this, like, really rich, powerful guy who managed to exploit women in this way with no true, like, powers beyond political and social and economic, you know? And I think that's kind of what makes him almost the scariest Marvel villain of all. Like, he is somebody that exists in our own world. We have 1 million Dreykovs in our world today who are pulling the strings on so many vile and disgusting operations, either in secret or not even in secret, you know? And he's the Jeffrey Epstein. He, you know, it's and that's what made him so horrifying. And I love that he was killed by his own ego, like fully giving Natasha what she wanted just because he wanted to be able to explain it to her and be able to, like, say, look, I'm so much smarter than you. This is what I pulled off. Look at what I can do. And he walked right into her trap. And then when he escaped, he literally died because he just didn't get out fast enough, you know? And that was just a good way for him to go, like, just killed by his own ego because he thought that he was a god, that he was better than everybody. And when he said that girls were the one resource the world has too much of, I genuinely got chills. Like, that was just horrific to hear in the theater. And I think a common thread with men who've watched Black Widow and negatively reacted to it is it comes down to those villains, and they don't think the stakes are high enough or the villains are scary enough. But to me, it was horrifying. And it's because men will never understand. They'll never understand the scene where Natasha flinched away from Dreykov and how horrifying that was to watch. And to see Natasha reduced to that because of what that man is capable of. And it just was horrifying to me to like hear him say that line and to see what he was able to make these girls do without their consent. I mean, when he just pressed a button and that one widow just like died because whatever, it was just crazy. Like, it was horrific to see the lack of autonomy, to see consent fully taken away, to see women be so abused. It was just so scary, and I can't imagine, walking out of this movie being like, oh my god, the villains were boring. The one, I just, yeah. And I mean, I mentioned this before, but like I said, I don't think that this movie with those themes could have been made, a couple years ago. Especially to see human trafficking talked about on such a grand scale. Like, literally, in a Marvel movie. It made $100 million its opening weekend. And it's a movie about human trafficking. Like, that is crazy. And I just don't think that kind of movie could have been made before, like, 2017. And I'm so glad that it came out now when it did, because it just feels really topical. It feels really needed. So I want to talk about Natasha as a character in this movie. Obviously, I've seen a bit of her scenes from the first Avengers movie. I've seen a little bit of her scenes from Age of Ultron. But the only movies that I've actually seen her in are Infinity War and Endgame. And I think for me, this movie was just kind of like a perfect bridge between what happened during like the first Avengers and the other Avengers and then Captain America Civil War, like all of that. And Winter Soldier, actually, I take it back. I've seen her in Winter Soldier, which, you know what? Somebody told me that The Winter Soldier was Natasha's best movie, like for her scenes or whatever. She was a wingman in the whole, like, all she did was talk about Steve Rogers' love life the whole entire movie. She didn't talk about anything else. I was like, this is the movie this is her best movie. Okay. Obviously, this was before Black Widow came out, but still, I was like, oh my god, this is the bar? The bar's on the ground. The bar's in hell for Natasha content, apparently. Anyway, so I feel like this movie kind of was like the perfect bridge between the Natasha that we saw in movies like The Winter Soldier and then the Natasha that we saw in Infinity War and in Endgame, especially because like she was broken off from her family to then like the Natasha that we see in Endgame in particular, who led the Avengers for 5 years trying to figure out what to do. And it just was such a cool way to kind of see, and I'll talk about this when we get more, I'm going to talk more about like Natasha and Elena and their dynamic, but it was really wonderful to see that kind of like leader quality and softness that we see in Endgame, like when she's like sitting and eating the peanut butter sandwich, and she's talking to Carol and she's talking to all of these people, to see that leadership and responsibility and also just like softness and determination build and bubble up in this movie to then see an Endgame. I just thought it worked really well, and it was a cool transition for her character. I think this was a wonderful like pivot point for her character in the films in general. And I thought they portrayed her as everything that she was, as smart, loyal, and a badass. And I loved how she was able to take down the main villain while using her intelligence, outsmarting Dreykov, and doing whatever needed to be done to take him out, even, breaking her own nose. I thought that was crazy. I love that they didn't make her try to, like, seduce him or anything like that, because it really would have been so easy for this movie to make her try and like use her feminine wiles, like all of that, but they didn't, and I love that. And I think again it's just like a mark of this female director that we had that truly cared so much about Black Widow to make this movie, and Scarlett Johansson, who understands the character so well and was obviously done dirty with her time in Marvel, and I know that she would not have let any of that happen. And I really appreciated the scene in her office where the main takedown of the villain wasn't some like overblown CGI fight fest battle. It was Natasha using her intelligence to outsmart this really evil guy who was evil, but he was also very smart, and Natasha was able to use his ego against him. And she just understood what needed to be done. And I love that. And that kind of energy obviously like carried over into Infinity War and Endgame, where she understood what she needed to do, what her role needed to be. And I think was inspired by her time with Yelena and Alexei and Melina to, to lead the Avengers and to have that kind of presence. So speaking of that, Natasha and Yelena as a duo. So I think that one thing that really annoys me about a lot of the coverage about this movie is that a lot of the criticism comes from people saying that this is more Yelena's movie than Natasha's, which I don't think that that's true. We learn just from this movie that Yelena is a very talkative person, and she's also very open with her emotions, whereas Nat is rather closed off, and she uses a few words when many are needed, and which is, why? Like I was saying, like her journey is so meaningful in this film because Yelena brings out the best of her and makes her realize how important being emotional and having connections is, especially when it comes to reconnecting with her family. In Age of Ultron, Natasha explains that she thinks she's a monster for the things that the Red Room did to her and made her do. And this movie allows her to rehabilitate herself, and she's only able to do that after Yelena shows her the strength that resides in openness and vulnerability. And I think that that is so perfectly summed up by the scene where, Yelena's like, it was real to me, don't say that, it was real to me, it was the most real part of my life. And Natasha is like, it wasn't real, she's, being defensive and kind of like taking out her hurt on her family members around her, quote unquote family members, And then obviously later in the movie, we get that scene towards the end, right at the end, where they touch foreheads and Natasha says, it was real to me too. And because over the course of the film, she realized that Yelena finds strength within her vulnerability and within her emotions and within her connections to people. And Natasha sees that and she understands. And it's really cool because they help each other so much, because also Yelena, I think throughout this movie, she realizes that Natasha, despite being kind of closed off and maybe not as emotionally, open as she is, she's also incredibly strong and smart and resilient. And I think that Yelena sees that and wants to emulate her and looks up to her in such a cool way that I just love this sister relationship. And it makes me sad when people are like, this was Yelena's movie, she was the star. Was she a standout? Sure, she was. But at the same time, Natasha's dead. They had to do something to not only make this movie feel appealing to an audience because she's dead. Who wants to go see a movie about only the character that literally just died? Like, it doesn't matter, For some audiences, they would feel that way. So they killed two birds with one stone. They have Natasha have this really meaningful storyline with her sister while also simultaneously building up her sister and having this kind of like love letter to Natasha the entire time, which I really appreciated. And I just thought it worked really well. And I just can't blame them for taking this opportunity to not only create a really wonderful and meaningful story for Natasha, but also for taking the opportunity to build Yelena and see what audiences think of her and see how we can how we can see her going forward, And speaking of Yelena going forward, and really mainly just in this movie first though, I loved her. I loved Yelena. I walked away from this movie with so much love in my heart for her. And I know I'm not alone. I know that everybody walked out of this movie as a Yelena stan, which we all should have. I think she's the perfect person to pick up the baton from Natasha. And like I said before, I think it's because she's not Natasha. Like she's not her. Yelena is not Natasha, Yelena's not a carbon copy of her sister. She's not going to ever replace her sister because Natasha can't be replaced, you know? Like, Elena is kind and soft despite everything the world has put her through, but she's also blunt and realistic, and I think that makes for such an interesting character, especially with the wonderful performance by Florence Pugh, who could go from dramatically recounting her involuntary hysterectomy to Alexei to make him finally shut up, to having that wonderful emotional scene with him after proudly declaring how that life was real to her. It's just so nice to watch, and especially to watch Natasha bounce off of, because you can see Elena like crawling under her skin and just like living in her heart and worming her way into, you know, into like the softest parts of Natasha. And it's just really wonderful, especially during the scene where they're talking about Yelena's vest, which also highlights the themes of the movie by having her casually mention how this is the first clothing item she's ever bought for herself, the first time she's had the freedom to do so. And Yelena talks animatedly about her vest, and you can literally see Natasha's ice-cold exterior melt, and it's just such a great dynamic. And Yelena's just such a wonderful character. I just think she's neat. And then speaking of Yelena in the future, the post-credits scene and what this means, it really actually got me pretty hyped. I'm not gonna lie. I am, like I said, I'm not a Marvel fan. I'm not like running out to the theater to see Marvel movies. I don't really care. I've not watched a single Marvel Disney Plus show. Don't really care about them. But this made me really excited. I think Yelena being given the opportunity to go after Clint is just, it's awesome. And I really hope they at least let her beat him up. Like, I don't think they'll let her kill him, but I think that they should let her beat him up. The next time we'll see Yelena will be in the Hawkeye series, which is the only Marvel Disney Plus show I'm actually looking forward to, especially because it's starring Haley Steinfeld, who I freaking love. She's the best Emily Dickinson. I've loved her since Pitch Perfect 2. She's literally incredible. Oscar nominee Haley Steinfeld. And then also, I mean, Florence Pugh is going to be in the show as Yelena. That is already a major selling point for me as well. And Yelena is going to rock Clint's shit, and I love that. I think it's really interesting how they've handled this whole thing, because to me, it almost feels like they're not going to sweep under the rug how badly they treated Black Widow all these years by like making it a plot point and having Yelena be the force driving that story. Like, Tony has murals and statues and shit, and Steve has museum exhibits and all kinds of other monuments or whatever, and yet like Natasha has nothing. Just a gravestone. And I mean, for me, how I took that scene is that Yelena put up that gravestone and she put it in Ohio. Like, that's just how I imagined that scene going. Like, that's just what I thought when I first watched it. And Yelena probably paid for it. You know, Natasha didn't even get a funeral in Endgame. You know, she just got nothing. And now they're going to acknowledge this by allowing Yelena to exact her revenge and hopefully share with the world at some point how badly everyone, Avengers included, treated Black Widow. Especially because now that we all know the only big kill that Natasha regrets, which was Dreykov's daughter, wasn't actually a kill, and she saved her. There's such a huge difference between her and Clint, who went on a 5-year killing spree because he was sad, even though everybody else in the world was sad too. This is a Clint Barton hate account. Only MCU Clint Barton, though. Comment Clint is great. I saw a tweet the other day talking about how Natasha was, you know, in the movie saying that the Avengers were her family, and the tweet actually was like, were you theirs? Like, was Natasha the Avengers family? Because like, she says over and over again that the Avengers were her family, but they didn't treat her like that she was theirs, you know? It was just like, what? Oh my god, like, I don't know. I think Yelena is gonna be forcing the audience and the characters to reconcile with that concept of being like, was Natasha their family, you know? And I think really this is almost even more prominent with that scene from WandaVision that actually never made it to being filmed, but it was storyboarded, where Wanda, in one of the later episodes, is kind of like going on this big rant about the Avengers that died, you know, during Endgame. And she says, you know, that Tony got all of these memorials, and same thing for Steve, whatever. And then she says, but what about Natasha? And then she says, well, at least she was flesh and blood. And then she says, no memorials for the whatever Vision is, for the robot guy, you know? Because, you know, and it's true, like, even in the canonical world of the films, they have treated both, I mean, you know, to Wanda's point, Vision and Natasha like shit because they're not Iron Man and they're not Steve. And I mean, the thing is that I think the line that Elena says in this movie, where she talks about how Natasha is a murderer that little girls look up to, or a trained killer that little girls look up to. I think that was kind of pointed, and maybe we'll see kind of a reference to that when she goes after Clint, or, you know, maybe when she's talking to Kate Bishop about what she's doing there, you know, something like that. Or maybe she, like, you know, gets on the news and says something. I don't know. You know, I don't know how this is going to go down. I especially don't know anything enough about the MCU to really make any predictions beyond just thinking that line is probably going to come back around at some point, because Elena knew that, like, little girls looked up to Natasha, and she was just as visible of a member of the Avengers as Tony and as Steve, and yet, you know, there was no memorials for her. There was nothing beyond this tombstone, and there wasn't even a funeral, you know? And I think a lot of people were kind of like, well, they could have done the funeral as the post-credit scene, but I don't think so. I don't think that they should have done that, because, like I said, they're not brushing her treatment under the rug. Now they're making it the main plot point, because I think they recognize that both in and out of canon, they have treated Black Widow like absolute garbage. And I'm glad that they're not ignoring it and just kind of, like, you know, shoving it under the rug and putting it in a drawer and being like, you're crazy, you know, take what you get, and moving on. That if they had given her that funeral, that is kind of how I feel like it would have gone, you know, like they would have been like, look, here's the funeral you all were complaining about, you know. And I'm just glad that they are taking that and making it a thing. And I think it'll be a bit, you know, a little bit of a vindication for fans of Black Widow, and for fans of, you know, Natasha, and just, you know, people who want to see Clint's ass get kicked, you know? And I'm actually really excited to see how Kate Bishop is going to react to finding out about Clint's time as Ronin, because I know that that's what's going to happen. Yelena is going to be the one to reveal to Kate that her mentor spent 5 years just, like, killing people for fun because he was sad. And I'm just really excited to see how that interaction goes down. But I'm just really excited for Hawkeye, because I know that there's going to be so much cool content with Yelena, and I'm so excited to see what happens with her going forward. I will pay to see anything she's in. Not even joking. But also, I just really enjoyed this movie. I thought it worked really well. I thought the themes were so cool and so great. And also, I mean, this movie is funny. This movie is enjoyable. This movie made me laugh. It made me cry. It made me very stressed. It also, you know, was just soothing in some moments. You know, I loved that really, I mean, maybe what will maybe be the last appearance of Scarlett Johansson as Natasha, we got to see her go off, you know, to be a hero and to go save the world. We didn't have to think about her on the ground in Vormir, you know, after jumping off a cliff, you know, and so I appreciate that. And yeah, so that is, those are my thoughts on Black Widow. If you liked the movie, please let me know what you thought about it. You know, what your thoughts about the movie were. Even if you didn't like it, just tell me and we can talk. We can have a little debate. You can leave me a comment down below if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're not, you can tweet me at televisedpod on Twitter and let me know what you think. And I hope you enjoyed this episode. I know that I was a bit MIA for the past couple weeks, but since Batwoman was off and Supergirl was off, I just took some time to just kind of recharge and, you know, sit and be sad about the Batwoman finale. Anyway, thank you guys so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please let me know. You can share, rate, like, subscribe, do all the things, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.